All right, everybody, welcome into another episode of Floyd Street's Finest. I am your host, Jeff Greer, and we have another episode of just, I don't know what to talk about here. It's just things have gotten from not great to progressively worse to really getting to the bottom of the barrel for Louisville men's basketball, and the season is barely underway. But before we get into the conversation with Rob Dauster, I just want to remind all of you to make sure you go rate and review the podcast and leave us a 5-star rating. If you do not want to leave a 5-star rating, don't leave a rating for us, and just forget about it. You can just tweet at me, and I probably already have you muted. If you want to leave a review too, that would be awesome. It's the only way, it's a big way that people out there discover the Louisville basketball podcast as part of that Field of 68 media network. And as I tell you every week, every show, every podcast that Field of 68 does, you need to go find it. Go find the Field of 12, find all of them, lock in on all of them, subscribe to all of them. They're on every possible platform that you could imagine. So make sure you're locked in on all of them. There's so much good content out there. If you're a college basketball junkie like I am, if you're a college football junkie like so many of you are, I highly recommend all of these podcasts. So lock in. The only one I would say don't listen to is anyone that Rob Dauster is on. Which is a real problem because he's sitting here with me now, Rob. Well, let's just jump right into it, man. I mean, Louisville's 0-8. Louisville is 208 as of today in the KenPom ratings. They have lost every Power 6 game that they have had by 19 or more points. They were down a point at halftime against Cincinnati at the Maui Invitational after getting rocked by Arkansas and Texas Tech. And people were like, oh, well, maybe they'll be competitive in this game. And they still lost that game by 19. As someone who is watching this unfold locally, it's very different, as you know, in this market. We get a lot of information. We follow the team very, very closely, day in, day out, hour by hour. And even with a football coaching change imminent here as Scott Satterfield has left, people are still talking about the basketball program in large quantities, as maybe more so sadly than anything else. But I'm curious, as someone who has to keep tabs on everything across the country, what has been your perception of what's going on in Louisville?
It's shocking how far they've fallen this year, right? Like we knew Louisville was going to have a tough season. I don't think anybody is surprised by the fact that they are not good. They only have one guard on the roster. It's a new coaching regime. You didn't get people out of the portal that maybe you necessarily expected Kenny to go out and try to get. But the level of bad that they are, it just, to me, it screams almost. I mean, I'm sure you're probably watching more Louisville than I am right now, but it screams almost like a lack of effort, right? There's no way that you can lose all those high major games by that many points and have it be something any more than you're just not necessarily trying. And look, I can hardly blame them, right? What are you playing for this year at this point?
Yeah,
absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
How many of those guys do you think want to go play those games? You're 0-8, you're getting 30 pieced every night. So I kind of get it. I mean, everybody's a human being, but it's to me, the more interesting conversation here is what's the way back? You know, I think we've seen a lot of historically proud and historically great programs hit these rough patches, and some of them have climbed out of them. Like some of them have climbed out of those holes. Some of them have returned to national relevancy, and others haven't. You know, look at where Georgetown is right now. Right?
Yeah,
Georgetown
look at Pitt, my alma mater, Pitt.
Yeah, I would argue that that Louisville is historically is a better basketball program than Pitt is. I mean, they've won.
Oh no, I totally,
titles.
yeah, of course. But I just mean how quickly they fell off.
Yes, the one that's fascinating to me is a program like a Houston, right? And because they were historically great for like the 80s and the 90s. Someone like a DePaul, who, you know, people our age may not realize just how good that team was in the 80s and even into the 90s when they had like Quentin Richardson and those guys. You look at them now and they were never able to get back up to that level. And where Louisville is at this moment, are they going to be able to climb out of this hole? I think that is a much more interesting conversation than whatever's happening this season. Because this is a lost season. We can call it that at this point, right? The big question is like, are you going to avoid going 0 and whatever? Are they going to be able to find a win? And like, if you're not competitive with Florida State this season, like, I don't know if you're going to be able to be competitive with anybody.
Well, there's been, for this region, and I'm looking at my phone here as I'm perusing KenPom to bring it up as a comparison. So the year after the Kelvin Sampson fiasco at Indiana that brought in Tom Crean, and Crean had that first year where I don't even know how many scholarship guys he had. He had some decent players, but overall they knew that they were the worst team of the Power 5 teams out there. They went 6-25. And in KenPom ratings, they were 209th, which Louisville is 208th right now. And you just look at the scores of these games. And first of all, they started 5-4. So, they beat a TCU, they beat IUPUI, Cornell, but they also beat Northwestern State and Chaminade. Like, Louisville's not beating those teams. Louisville barely beat Chaminade in an exhibition. They lost to Lenore-Rhine in an exhibition. They've lost to all of these teams that are comparable to the IUPUIs and Northwestern States of the world. Their only game left that you would point to and say, yeah, that they should win is Florida A&M. And the rest of the ACC schedule,
the keyword should. Right?
They should win that game, but they haven't won a game this year. They don't have that experience of winning a game. And people keep comparing it to this Indiana team, but I'm looking at this Indiana schedule, and they lost by 5 at Iowa. They lost in 2 overtimes, or in an overtime, to Michigan. They lost by 4 to Minnesota, 2 to Northwestern. They were losing hard-fought close games with a team that just was not going to win a lot of games. Louisville is getting absolutely rocked by every team they play, and they've barely started conference play. The first game they played in conference, they got destroyed by Miami. And so all of a sudden, it's like, it's very difficult for me to sit here and say, outside of Florida A&M, there isn't a game on the schedule that I think they can win. I don't think they can beat Florida State. I don't think they can beat Pittsburgh. They can't beat Georgia Tech. And so you start to think, what is the path back? I don't know that there is. How do you go out and recruit after your first year, you go 1-31? How do you recruit that? You've got resources, you've got brand name, you've got history, all this great tradition. You've got Donovan Mitchell as one of the marquee players in the NBA as a product of your program, which of course we all know is a big selling point, is to be able to say like, hey, this guy comes back a lot. He gives us gear, all this stuff. You've got Jack Harlow as this guy who has become a big figure in the music industry, comes back all the time and is big with Louisville basketball, loves Louisville basketball, all this Adidas money, all this stuff that Adidas does for you. You've got a new AD that wants to really usher in a new era of NIL stuff and has on the football side. But your basketball team, at the end of the day, you got to show people you've got some tangible things here. And instead, you might be selling.
That's what I think those are tangible things, right? Like,
those are all tangible things, but you can't recruit kids to come play for a guy who went 1-31. Can you?
No, I trust me. I get that. I do. There's, for the most part, I agree with you. Where I would push back is, I think the combination of selling what Louisville can be when it's at its best, with the fact that Kenny Payne does have relationships and he has been known to be a guy that can pull in a recruit, right? And combine that with the NIL money that you could potentially get, and saying you could be the guy that takes Louisville basketball back to the top. And do you know how much you will be loved in this city, by this community, by this university, by this alumni base, if you are the guy to take them from 1-31 to competing for ACC titles again? I think that when you you want to stick with the Indiana comparison, look at a guy like Yogi Ferrell, right? Look at that recruiting class. I think it was him. I want to say like it wasn't Christian Watford. Maybe Jordy Hulls was in that group. I think Cody Zeller was in that group. That group of guys that took Indiana back from the depths 2 winning Big Ten titles. Those guys are going to be legends in that state forever. They're going to be heroes in that state forever, no matter what happens. And I do think that, to me, that is the recruiting pitch. Now, that means that it's going to be a slow build. You're not going to go out there and get the 4 best players out of the portal, 3 top 25 recruits, and all of a sudden next season you are a top 25 team. So if you're a Louisville fan, I think you kind of have to strap in for the long haul here. But to me, that is the recruiting pitch, right? And I do think that that's going to appeal to players. I mean, look, Louisville's Louisville, right? Just because you go 1-31, you still have that brand appeal. At least I think you would, right? Mm-hmm. But it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be something where you just snap your fingers and you flip the switch. And my big question is Kenny Payne the guy to do that? I don't think that we can have any opinion on what his ability is to coach a basketball team on the floor right now, because I think that this team is just completely and totally and utterly flawed. When you have 1 guard on your roster, you're never going to be able to win basketball games. That's just the bottom line, right? When you are bringing in Masterpiece Son, who couldn't see the floor for Tennessee Tech or Tennessee State, where the hell he was before, and asking him to play like legitimate minutes, you're just never going to win basketball games. You know, we called it the year of the big, right? But if you go back and look at teams that have won the national titles, I think the only one that didn't start 2 point guards was the Villanova team in 2018, the last 12 years. Think about the team that won it from Louisville. They started Russ Smith and Peyton Siva. You basically have 2 point guards on the floor, right? Mm-hmm. So it's when you don't have that guard play, you can't run an offense. When you can't run an offense, you don't have enough talent to be able to make up for the fact that you can't scheme anything. You can't run anything. You can't get points out of sets. It's just you so severely limit yourself. And to me, that's the biggest criticism on Kenny right now. Like, how do you not see that coming, man? Like, how do you not go get anybody out of you're fucking Louisville? You can't go out there and just find one guy that probably should be at like an Appalachian State as opposed to playing in the ACC. You get 3 guards out of the portal that should be mid-major players, put them on this roster and have them like just be able to be functionable. Mm-hmm. And you have enough talent in the front court that you're like a 10-win team as opposed to a 1-win team. And if you're a 10-win team here, I think everybody's understanding is like, yeah, it's a new season. You just got rid of all these sanctions. You just had this hanging over your head. You just had a coach leave on you in the middle of the season. It's going to be a rebuild. And everyone's like, yeah, okay, I get it. It is what it is. If you are competitive in games against like Georgia Tech, you're going to be fine. If you're getting smoked by Cincinnati, like, come on. That's the
problem. Yeah. Here's the thing, Rob. I think all of those things sound great. They had the spring. They whiffed on everyone they went after. Mm-hmm. Whiffed. All those guys are off playing somewhere else. You literally had 40 minutes at one of your guard positions to sell, and you couldn't get any guy in the transfer portal. You couldn't get a single guy. You had 40 minutes to sell. Then you go through the summer. You say, okay, look, roster stinks for this season. But they'll be able to get out on the recruiting trail in the summertime and really get a head start, or not maybe get a head start, but be in a good position for the 2023 class. They keep a kid in it in Caleb Glenn, who was committed prior to this staff coming in, who is Louisville through and through, and I think would go there if I was the coach, but is a good player and is a nice addition to this class. You go out and you get Curtis Williams, who's a guy who is more of like a sharpshooter, straight line driver, big wing, who I think will help them. But he's a guy who you put in a class with 5 stars and you say, okay, this is your guy who will be there 3 or 4 years and he can develop. So those are 2 good recruits. I don't want to act like they don't have anybody in their class, but you had all summer come into the fall. And by the time the visits were all supposed to be coming around, you have had no guards on your campus. 0, none. The guy you put all of the marbles in, or at least the 2 that we thought they were putting all their marbles in, one went to your rival school, Kentucky, after you hired his grandfather, and the other one didn't even come on his visit. He canceled his visit for whatever reason, and now he's going to Texas. So Louisville is going into the spring with this staff that is supposedly a big-time recruiting staff with all these connections, with nobody, again, from the high school side of things, when we were led to believe that was the big reason that they were hired, was to go out and do some big recruiting stuff in the 2023 and beyond class. I mean, I think there's probably a significant portion of the Louisville fan base, and you don't want to overstate Twitter and the amount of people on there who are vocal, but there is a significant portion of people who thought literally that the hiring of Kenny Payne meant DJ Wagner as your starting point guard in 2023. Like that's it. And they didn't get him. And then you whiff on AJ Johnson, and now you're like, okay, you're going to go back into the portal and try to do what you couldn't do last year, which is offer up a bunch of minutes to somebody. You're not going to, there's no reason to think that they can do that. There's no reason to think that now maybe the NCAA ruling helps them a little bit, but you've got to do, you say that, okay, you compare it to what you're watching. And to me, effort, problems, that's coaching. They haven't figured out how to motivate their guys. They don't have
100% right about that.
They don't have a scheme for the roster they built. They built the roster. They don't have
that's the problem. The problem is they didn't build a roster that you can scheme for. You have one guard.
Fair. Yeah,
you have one guard.
But figure it out,
You're
man.
never going to be able to so that my issue is exactly what you just said. My issue is what he built, right? It's just not possible to have any idea what Kenny Payne is as an X's and O's coach if he has talent, because he just does not have the pieces to be able to run anything. Like, you got one guard. So to me, the criticism for Kenny is you built a roster that's just never going to be able to work. And if you thought that this roster was going to be able to work, then okay, then we're going to have a problem, right? Then what are you doing in that role? So I hear you. But I also think it's fair to say, like, when you start the season this poorly and you got a bunch of kids that are kind of thrown together and are new, like there's no culture that you're putting these guys into where they care about everything, right? It's a bunch of new faces on a roster with a new coach that these guys don't even really know all that well. Are you really expecting them to go out there and fight tooth and nail for a guy that just got hired? Like I understand what you're saying. It's a tough spot to be in with that group when you are getting beat like this. There's just none of them want to play. Like, would you want to go out there if you know that you're going to get 30 pieced? Would you want to go out there if you knew that you had a team that just had no chance of winning? Would you want to be playing? Like,
that was my AAU team and my high school team, Rob. It was tough. It's a heavy build to get to the point where you're competitive. But let me just throw this back at you. I'm interested for your thoughts on it. Okay, when Kenny Payne was hired, and I think for a lot of reasons at the time, we call it resulting, the 0-8 start, recruiting failures already, like all this stuff. You can't say, okay, it was a bad hire, when at the time it made a lot of sense. It made a ton of sense for Louisville to make that hire, but it was predicated on recruiting and selling players on effort for playing for a guy who won a national championship and was a player's favorite at Kentucky, and a guy who's got a laundry list of incredible kids who came through Kentucky, go off to the pros, and all adore him, especially the big guys. They all adore him. He's got relationships. No one's questioning that. But when you hire someone like that, you expect them to come in, and if nothing else, Rob, roster construction's not great, recruiting's not going well, your team is an underdog against most opponents, you would expect that group then, if nothing else, to play its absolute ass off for that coach because of who he is, what he represents for Louisville. And they don't do it. And that's where, for me, I'm like, okay, all of these other things, maybe they can get better over time, but you can't motivate your current group to play for you. Then what are we even doing here?
No, I get you. And I think that that is definitely a problem. And I'm not saying that it's not something that we should just ignore, be like, yeah, whatever. It's not an issue. It's definitely an issue. But I think that the reason this is happening is because you built a team that it's not possible to win games at this level against good mid-major teams, against high major opponents with one guard on the roster. Like, you're setting yourself up for failure. You're setting yourself up to lose. And when you lose, it becomes that much harder to motivate guys to play hard. Like, what's the difference between playing hard for them right now? It means they're going to lose by 10 instead of losing by 30. Like, there's no way that's not going to work. Kids are going to be like, fuck this. right? So that's my issue. If you look at the pieces on the roster, Jalen Withers is good enough to play on a high major basketball team, right? Yeah. He's good enough to do a job. Brandon Huntley Hatfield, like 5-star guy. He's good enough to do a job on a high major basketball team. I would even say L. Ellis is good enough to do a job on a high major basketball team. If you go out and you get guys that can be functional floor spacers, guys that can be functional ball handlers, guys that can maybe just get you into an offensive set. If you go out, I really do believe this. If you go out and you just picked up 3 guys that went from like the SWAC to the Colonial, right? Or someone that is now playing at, like I said, Appalachian State, someone that is a decent mid-major basketball player in the backcourt. You bring those guys on this roster and you just have them on the floor to be able to do a job. I think that this is a 10 to 15 win basketball team as opposed to a 1-win basketball team, because then you have a functional group that actually works. So I don't think that you can actually evaluate anything about Kenny Payne because the roster build is just so bad. So why is the roster build at this point? Why do we only have 1 guard of the roster? Is it because Kenny couldn't actually get anybody because everybody was concerned about whether or not they were going to be banned from the NCAA tournament? I don't know if that's necessarily fair. There's mid-major guys that would have come to play in the ACC just to prove themselves, to be able to have a shot to play professional basketball overseas, to be able to shot to get into the G League, to be able to just see what they could do at that level. Playing in the ACC is playing in the ACC. There's guys that would have done it. So I don't know if that's necessarily an excuse. Did he just target the wrong kids and not have a backup plan? That might be it too. But I think that right now, if he actually thought that this was going to be a group with this roster build that could compete in the ACC, that's a much bigger issue than not being able to motivate kids, than not being able to do different things. And I don't believe that that's true. I think Kenny is too smart of a basketball guy to think like, hey, I can go out and, I'm gonna make the NCAA tournament with 1 guard on my roster.
No, I mean, he warned us. He warned everybody about it.
Yeah. So I don't know what the exact issue is. I don't think that you can evaluate Kenny on anything beyond the fact that he just was not able to build a roster. But like, building a roster is a incredibly important part of, this isn't the NBA, right? In the NBA, the coaches go out there and coach. The general managers, the front office, they build the roster for that coach. That's not the way that it works here. He's got to build his roster. If his roster is fucked, it's because he fucked it.
Yeah. Well, and it doesn't help that Kevin Willard came in here with Maryland, a Maryland team that the associate head coach now for Louisville had to be the interim coach for, because it fell apart, and built them into off to a great start, playing their butts off for him.
You know what the difference is there?
Destroyed them.
The difference is he got 2 good players out of the portal, and I mean, Mark Chargin left him with a bunch of talent. The issue with Maryland wasn't talent. The issue with Maryland was all coaching. Rob.
Okay. Yes. Fair. Louisville has Jalen Withers, top 75 kid.
They have 1 guard. They have 1 guard. Jeff,
top 75 kid. Hold on, Mike.
This isn't really an exaggeration. This may not be an exaggeration. Listen, you might be the second best guard on the Louisville roster. How much eligibility do you have?
Mike James was a top 100 recruit. He is your starting shooting guard. Kamari Lands was a top 50 recruit. He is your small forward. I hear you.
There's talent.
I hear you.
I'm not arguing with you on that.
But
I just don't think you can win.
It's coaching too. Coaching is so important. And Kevin Willard,
he coaches his ass off.
Coaches his ass off. He was coaching the walk-ons. At the end of the game, they're up 30. He's screaming at them about their sets. So look, I think I'm not going to ever be a guy after 1 season. I mean, after 8 games to be screaming about coaching changes and stuff. I think there's a learning curve. This is a big job. That was something that I'm sure if you ever get the chance to talk to Chris Mack about it, like, I think any coach who comes in here, really truly has to know what the job is. And I think Kenny Payne does, which I think is probably why he understands, like, this is not great right now. But like, Chris Mack discovered a lot of things about the job after he got here that made it a little bit more of an overwhelming experience. So I'm not the guy who's going to scream and shout that Kenny Payne's got to go or anything like that. But I would say, like, the learning curve just keeps getting steeper and steeper. And he's got a lot of work to do very quickly, because if you lose the fan base, this place can be a tough place to operate if you lose the fan base. But I do want to let's zoom out a little bit, Rob, because this is a big topic here in Louisville. And it's one that I think will impact whether or not they can rebuild this roster to their liking and hope to start getting some wins in 2023 and beyond. What are you hearing out there about NIL? What is the significance of it in recruiting? How is it approached? Where is the impact there? Because Kenny Payne has been pretty vocal about saying, look, I know it's a part of the game now, but I don't want to sign anybody. I don't want to recruit anybody who's saying NIL is the most important thing. And there's a lot of fans who are frustrated with that because they think that is impacting whether or not Louisville is able to get kids.
NIL shouldn't be the most important thing, right? But it needs to matter, right? The money that you're making matters, especially when you can go out and you can get, 6-figure NIL deals from the places that are going to be recruiting the same level of kids that Louisville is going after. Now, you don't want it to strictly be a financial thing, right? Yeah. And I think in the places where it is strictly a financial thing, you're going to find guys. If you're just doing it for the money, your heart's not going to be in it the way that it is. If you're doing it for the program, for the culture, for the family, for whatever cliche buzzword coach speak thing you want to throw out. But there are guys that have taken smaller deals, less money, to go to places that I think are better fits. Baylor Shireman, for example, ended up at a place where he took a little bit less money because he thought that he was the piece on a winning team, right? But that's the issue when it comes to Louisville, is that it's going to have to be a money thing at the start, right? Because you're not getting Baylor Shireman, that one of the top transfers on the market, that is coming here to say like, hey, look, I will take a little bit. He's still getting paid a lot of money. He's taking a little bit of a pay cut there because it's the opportunity to win a Big East title and win a national title. At Louisville, you got to pay top dollar to get these guys to come in. That's just what it is. That's the era that we're living in. And like, honestly, Jeff, it kind of is the era that we were living in before. Just, it was always talked about like, hush, hush, quiet. Yeah. We're just going to pretend like this ain't happening. Yeah. But you got to have NIL to be effective. There's two things. Well, you don't have to. You have to have NIL if you want to go after a lot of the kids that Louisville is going to go after, or you basically have to be Matt Painter, because Purdue doesn't have money coming in. And what he's able to do is build a group of players that are so bought into the Purdue identity, that so understand that if we are great for Purdue, then it's going to set us up for life. Like, we'll have a job wherever we want, whenever we want, from some Purdue alumni. And you just have to be able to develop a culture within your program over the years that makes it something where guys they absolutely love. I'm going to throw more coach we got the name on the front of the jersey as opposed to the name on the back of the jersey, right? That accept what they're being asked to do. And a lot of that is because, like, take Zach Edey, for example, right? Might be the national player of the year. Nobody but Matt Painter recruited him coming out of high school. He was like a sub 400 recruit because he was 7'4" and couldn't move and couldn't catch. Bring him into the program. He accepts what he has to do. He gets developed. Painter knows how to utilize him. Boom. All of a sudden, he's national player of the year. I think that if you look at a lot of the guys that they've brought in, it's kind of the same trajectory, right? So that's, and Painter's an interesting example too, because people forget about it now, but back in like 2013, 2014, he was on the hot seat. There was a point where people were at this guy. So you had the Hummel years, like it was Hummel, Jawan Johnson, Etwan Moore, where they were awesome. Then it got real lean for 2 or 3 seasons after that. And then he kind of adjusted what he was going after. Wasn't necessarily recruiting rankings, wasn't necessarily bringing in the most talented guy. He was bringing in the pieces that fit their culture and their identity and whatnot. And it's allowed him to be able to build the program to where it is, to where he can be they're as unexpectedly great as any team in college basketball, and they don't really have any kind of NIL situation going on there. So
it's possible, but yeah,
possible.
To your point, I mean, Louisville is I think
Louisville can't replicate the Purdue model because you don't have the coaching equity that Matt Painter does.
Right.
Like, does that make sense?
Yeah, and it's also just, I mean, Purdue, don't get me wrong, has a huge fan base. I know they're very popular. Louisville considers themselves to be a step above what that is. And I think, the last 7 years now have made it really difficult for a lot of other people to see it that way, but the fan base still views itself as the national title, the Final Four, the 1980s, just the laundry list of great players who have come through here. And it's not like them to have coaching issues for this program, because they went from Denny Crum, heck, even they had Peck Hickman, who's a great coach. They had Denny Crum, they had Rick Pitino. I mean, those are all excellent coaches who are among the best, if not the best, in their time. And I mean, shoot, I would argue right now that Pitino is the best pure basketball coach in college basketball. And they had him for a long time. And then you go to interim to Chris Mack, who is by all accounts, a good basketball coach, just didn't work out here, didn't fit here, to an interim, to now Kenny Payne. And you need to bet on Kenny Payne. You went out of your way to go hire him to fit what you were hoping to fit here at Louisville. You got to bet on him. And now it's like, okay, well, if you're going to bet on someone, you need to give them some time to build it. But there's nothing about the start that would give you any reason to think that it's going to get any better. And that's
to build it, you have to see progress. So I think like, let's see what this is by the end. Are you still getting 30-pieced by everybody by the end of the year? Are you completely non-competitive, or does it get to the point where at the end of the season you're pushing some of these teams and you give Duke a scare, and maybe you're able to do something like beat Virginia Tech at home or something like that? Can you get to like 6, 7, 8 wins? And I don't know.
They need something.
Yeah,
but it makes it
you
worse.
Go winless, look, I'll put it like this: you are 100% correct in that. It's unfair to have to really criticize a guy 8 games into his career, into his tenure. It's unfair to come after a coach in his first season. But if you go winless at Louisville with top 100 dudes,
30, if you go 1-31,
like it's to the point where it's like, yeah, you know what, man, like this didn't work.
No.
It's sorry, Kenny, but like this didn't work.
I hope not. He seems like he's a great dude. I don't know him.
You don't want that to happen to one of your own. Like he's one of their own.
That would be just brutal. That would be absolutely brutal. But look at what's happening at Georgetown, like we were talking about with one of their own, a guy who is just absolutely revered. And it's just not gone the way that they had hoped. Well, Rob, thank you. I mean, we could probably talk about this for another 3 hours, but we won't hang that on people.
Hey, listen, I'll tell you this much, you guys. If you're listening to this right now, Jeff Greer is giving you a podcast every week on an 0-18 that's getting 30-pieced. All right. If you can't give that man 5 stars for that, come on. Give him 5 stars.
With a 10-month-old at home and a day job. Let's go. Come on. Come on. All right, Robert, I appreciate you. Let's get out of here and watch this penalty shootout. What do you say?
That's exactly what I'm going to do. Unless, that was close.
Okay. Spain-Morocco is going on while we're recording this. So, Robert, thank you very much, my friend. Good chatting with you, and keep up the great work.